All right, so let's make a formal introduction for our listeners. Good afternoon, Jason. My name is Claudio. I'm calling you from Washington, D.C. From the studios in Fairfax City. Very humble and grateful that Jason Blake accepted our invitation to our show. Jason, welcome to the show, man.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
Hey, no problem. Let's go back to the beginning, Jason. Were you born like in a musical family? How old were you when you perhaps began taking piano lessons, guitar lessons when you were a little kid?
I wouldn't say my family was necessarily a musical family, but I remember as a very young kid, my dad always playing records for us on the weekend. So some of the earliest music I remember hearing was Tommy by The Who.
Yeah.
And a lot of, he was really into Mike Post. He did a lot of TV shows and composing for TV shows, and he had a few records of Mike Post. I remember a lot of that. So it was, for example, he did the soundtrack or the song for Rockford Files. He did NYPD Blue later on, but this was early on, and he would play that music a lot. So I remember that. But I wouldn't necessarily say that they were very musical, but they did get me into playing music early. So I started taking piano lessons pretty early. I would say, I don't remember exactly how old I was, but second grade or so, maybe somewhere in there. So I started playing piano for first, and I played piano for many years, actually. And then in high school, I switched to playing guitar, a little bit of guitar, and eventually bass. And that's when I started playing with bands. I kind of towards the end of high school, and really in college, I was in bands the entire time in college. I also started a college degree in music. Somebody persuaded me to bail on that and get a degree in something that they thought was more useful for me in life. So I bailed on the music degree, but I actually started going down that degree or down that path. I was playing upright bass at the time and learning from two different instructors. One was a jazz instructor and one was a classical instructor. So I was kind of taking that approach. I was playing electric bass in a lot of bands at the time, and did that actually for many years. I would, to a certain degree, I still consider myself a bass player. But then found the touchstyle guitar, which started with a Chapman stick and eventually moved to the Warr Guitar. And that's when I really kind of found my instrument, the one that spoke most to me. And it's kind of nice because in retrospect, it incorporates the piano with the whole way both hands are moving and touching the strings, but then it has that bass end of it because it has some low end in my left hand, and then I play more of the melody with the right hand. So it kind of incorporated everything. That's how I eventually moved to that instrument.
Gotcha. So when you were sort of high school, 18 years old, was any pressure for your parent to, hey, forget about the music, you're not going to make any money, you want to get married on the road, go to college, don't do anything music, study business engineering, whatever, or you were free to kind of choose to your path?
No, they were very encouraging. In fact, I was just thinking about this the other day. One of my first bands rehearsed in our basement, and I think about how terrible that was. They would try to watch TV and they'd have to turn the volume all the way up because we were making so much noise in the basement. And we rehearsed 4 nights a week. So I don't know how in the world they allowed that and and put up with it. But it lasted about a year. And then I think they finally had enough. And they said, all right, can you guys look for somewhere else? But I mean, they encouraged it to the point that we were allowed for an entire year to make a complete racket in the basement. So.
Sure. What kind of music were you listening at the time when you were 18, 15, 16?
I was always into heavier music, so I would say at that time I was definitely more into heavy metal and that kind of thing. We wanted to be progressive. I don't think we got quite there yet. I don't know if we were good enough at the time, but we tried our best to make interesting music. But it was always heavy. Always heavier music that I was into at the time, which is kind of weird because at the same time I was studying jazz and classical. So I I had that interest as well. I listened to a lot of that as well. But when it came to playing, I was always in more rock bands.
Yeah. Okay. Do you make any money? Playing live during the weekend, some gigs, clubs, or coffee shop or whatever at the time, or
I wouldn't say good money, but I would say that
enough
on the
to?
college scene, we were actually pretty decent, and
Wow.
we used to bring out quite a few people. One of the bands that I think had the most potential was also the shortest lived. We just four members that came together and wrote some really good music together, but socially together, we just didn't really fit very well. So we were constantly arguing, and so it didn't really work in the end. But I think we did a lot of great stuff, and that would be, I would say, the one that actually did the most during those college years as well.
Enough money to buy pizza and beer, I
Yeah,
suppose.
yeah, there you go. That was about
That's
it.
the diet that you
That's all I
have.
wanted at the time, though, so it didn't really matter.
You don't have a girlfriend or something, or you want to enjoy your music and I studied on the day or tried to study on the day. So I know how it's like, man. And like I told you before, I went to school there in Chicago as well. So I have great memories. Great memory from Chicago. It's always going to be Chicago and Boston is always going to be on the top of my list. Both cold cities, and then
Yeah.
for jobs and opportunity, we end up moving with the family to DC about I don't know 13 years ago. But have great memory from there. Feel free to elaborate on the Warr Guitar, the 12-string guitar, incorporating guitar and bass. How difficult it is to learn. Why that particular instrument to begin with? So
Yeah, so like I was mentioning, I think it came into it somewhat from a nice progression and a natural progression. I was, had the piano background. I was playing stringed instruments at the time. So, I mean,
yep.
it nicely incorporates both of them. So that it made sense. But I think the biggest thing that happened was that on bass, I was doing a lot of tapping already. So because I liked that sound and I liked that playability and what flexibility, what I was able to do by tapping the strings and using both hands to create more complex melodies, it seemed like a natural progression. So when somebody turned me on to the instrument, I kind of knew exactly, oh, this is what I was supposed to be doing, was playing on this instrument. I started with a 8-string stick bass, which is tuned similar to a bass, just has the extended range. And then moved to a grand stick, which is the 12-string version of the Chapman stick. And then from there moved to the Warr Guitar. And so I've been playing Warr Guitar ever since. It seemed like a natural progression to me.
Yeah.
Oh, and coming back to the question about playing,
yeah,
it's taken time. I would say that like any instrument, really, like, the amount of time you put into it. I came into it at a good time in my life too, where I just poured myself into it and just played constantly, and I still do actually. But I think that's the only way to really truly get good on an instrument, but especially this one where it is a little bit harder to wrap your head around how to play it. It's just hours.
I'm sure you're familiar with the band, Stick Band, right? With Tony Levin and Mastelot and all those guys, right? So
yeah,
I remember when I was listening to your music, I remember about listening to the music. I got to be interviewing Tony in between the gigs he's doing with Peter Gabriel and these very good people, very good music. And so you're done with high school, right? And then what's happened with college, between the time in college and then when you release your first album, I think it's called The Absence of Colors, right? So in 2002, right? 20 years.
There wasn't too much of a time gap in between end of college and releasing that. I moved around a lot though, so I think that's one of the things that also kind of stopped me. I would, every once in a while when I would get a band that seemed like it was up and running, I seemed to always be moving. And I would say at that time I was living in the Detroit area and I moved back to Chicago. And so Chicago, I was only here about a year or two when I put together that Absence of Color album. So that was the first album I had done on a touchstyle instrument. That was the stick bass actually on that one. I was playing in a few different things at the time, a few different bands, some rock bands with vocals, and I was doing, I had a string trio at the time, and it kind of all morphed and started falling apart at the same time. And that album was kind of the result of everything that was happening at the time. So it's a bit of a mixture of what I was listening to, playing at the time. I was into world music, very heavily influenced at that time too. So there's a definite touch of that in that album. And it was just me and a drummer on that album. But live, I added a cellist. And so again, it was that kind of a mixture of what I was doing with the string trio and writing with a different, more rock mentality. And it kind of morphed into being this band with a cellist, myself, and the drummer. I really wish that formation would have recorded something, because I think that sounded really great when we were playing live, and we played a lot as that in that formation. We just never got around to recording anything, unfortunately.
Where were you playing, in the Chicago area?
That would have been in the Chicago area.
Right, during you have another job at the time, you're doing weekend things or evening things, or
at the time, what was that? I would have been, I was in the advertising agency business at that time. So
I got you. And then how difficult was to get, deal with a record label? You did it on your own, or you went to self-release, or you went to a record label? Because
the first time, the first couple albums I did, I actually formed my own record label at the time. And I went to some conferences out in Las Vegas with a music industry guy, and it was really encouraging. I came back from them always very pumped to go do it all myself. He was always really big on that mentality of how to do it yourself. So I came back, formed a record label, and released that first album, and then 2 Aziola Cry records were on that record label. And then the intent was to start, taking it a little further, but then I started getting interest from other people, and then it just kind of folded, and I put it off to the side, because since then there's been interest from other labels, and so I've gone that route.
So at the time, you say interest for other people to go into a record label, or other record label approaching you, and say, hey, we can do better mastering, engineering. We have the resources, to do it better, like you, or whatever.
That's exactly so. Just everything seemed to be like for me just an upwards ramp. Everything just got a little bit bigger every single time, and so the next logical progression was for a label to take hold of what I was doing. I felt like I was getting close to the point of I had done everything I possibly could for the music, and I needed something else. And that was around the time too that labels started gaining interest in the band. So it was kind of right time, right place.
Yeah. Were you able to sell record or CDs at the time enough to make a little bit of money via music? Or
so it's a little bit of an interesting thing, because there is a big time gap that I'll kind of address. When those latter Aziola, the first 2 Aziola Cry albums came out, those actually sold very well for me, and that was all financed by me. That was my record label. That was all, and that did really well. We got a lot of great reviews on it. We were playing out quite a bit, and so I would say that it was starting to really grow. Things were moving in the right direction. Something happened. I'll just give you the 2-second version of it. I got divorced at the time, and that created a very, everything got slowed down basically. So there was a long gap, and when we had actually started recording the 3rd album, and then there had to be this long pause on everything. When we came back to finishing the album, having it all completely done, mastered, and ready, that's when labels picked it up. And at that point, it's kind of taken a life of its own now with that band and my solo stuff. So that was The Ironic Divide, which came out 2021, so a couple of
Yeah.
years ago now.
Yeah.
So yeah.
The other album that I really like is, I think it could have been the second one, the Aziola Cry, Ellipsis, right?
Yeah, that's the first album by
Oh, okay. Which one came first, Aziola or The Absence of Color?
The Absence of Color came first. That
Yes.
somewhat morphed its way. I started writing
Oh,
music
I
for
see.
what would be the next album, kind of that post that, and it turned into that band called Aziola Cry.
Yeah.
Because I also started working in more of a progressive rock sort of vocabulary. So with that,
Yeah.
and I wanted to change that up from what the stuff in my name at the time was a little bit more world music and jam sort of based. And so it became a band.
Yeah. I don't need to tell you, but most, people that play guitar or piano, or any instrument for that matter, they have their own band. They want to explore different avenues of music, so they don't play with a trio and then they come back 2 years later. Hey, have some idea, let's put something together. At the same time, the other guy would play with you in a trio. They do other stuff with other people, so like a sort of sick network kind of social network type of a scenario where people play for everybody, and in many ways that is good, I think, right? Because you can,
Yeah, well,
you
I
definitely want to
found it.
explore your stuff, right? So
Absolutely. I found that so the real trajectory of how I plot this out. So if you listen to Ghost Conversations, it's a 3-part full album. The first part is almost all ambient music.
yep,
And so I used to incorporate my love for ambient music into that band. Then what happened is we recorded The Ironic Divide, and that was really intentionally meant to be just, we're going to strip away all the atmospherics and everything and put out just a heavy record with just drums, guitar, and Warr Guitar. And in doing that, it kind of opened up this idea that I had was, well, where would I put my ambient music? Because I really still enjoy listening to that and writing it. So that's
yeah,
what kind of created this offshoot of me starting to do things on my own. So the first thing I did in that realm was called The Darkness Found in Shadows. And that was a straight up ambient album. I had this idea of taking the 7 deadly sins and putting music to each of the 7 deadly sins. And that's what that album was.
yeah,
And then from there, I did another one called Fictional Mirrors. That was a part of a trilogy that I'm working on. I've released 2 parts of that. And that was me kind of mixing some ambient music with the progressive rock thing. So there's odd time signatures and there's more of a structure to the songs, but it still feels very ambient in nature. And then there's the part 2 of that came out last year called The Compromise Rationale. And that the whole idea was taking the superego, the ego, and the id, and exploring each of those ideas. So up to this point, I've done the superego and the ego, and the id would be the last of those albums to do at some point. And then I released a couple other ambient albums in that same time frame: The Perfect Fallacy and Dreaming in Numbers. But then what happened? And so I got all that and I found my avenue for releasing my ambient music. So I no longer really incorporate that into Aziola Cry, the band. But then what was kind of happening is I needed to go back and write something for Aziola Cry, and I wasn't sure where to go. And I wrote what I thought would maybe be the next album, and that's what became Subsequent Ruins, the last thing I just did with Marco Minman.
yeah,
And it just to me didn't sound like that band. So I decided I would record it myself. And it also, what it allowed me to do is that I guess maybe I had music in me that needed to come out in order for me to get to a place where I could write the next Aziola Cry record. So in putting this album out, it allowed me I don't know how to even describe it, just opened my headspace up to being able to write the next Aziola Cry record, which I did over the holiday break of like last year into early this year. And so we started recording that. The drums have been tracked, the Warr Guitars have been tracked, and now the guitars are going to be tracked in the next month. So, yeah, it all, to me, it all makes sense. This path I'm going down. It's just sometimes it feels a little, like I'm doing a lot of different things and a lot of different sounds. But to me, it's all kind of a part of what makes sense to me, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, you gotta explore what makes you happy, right? And when you are, I don't know, early 20s, you like this kind of music, and you follow the following bands, and then late 20s, you like that, and so forth, and it's sometimes bands want to no, we are only a progressive band. You don't want to play ambient music or world music, or because we'll lose the crowd that follows us or buy our music. And on the other hand, you need to do what make you happy, I suppose, right? Eventually, you need to follow a path, but some people can do a lot of different things, and very talented. So.
Yeah, and I think one of the things too that always interests me, I'm a big fan of Jonas Hellborg, the bass player, Swedish bass player. And what I always loved about he created his own record label, and that was one of the inspirations for when I signed. But what I really liked is every album that he did was drastically different from the last one. And I liked that you never knew what you were going to get. One album, he would be working with a frame drummer, and the next album would be a rock guitarist and a drummer, and then the next one after that would be a sitar player. And it was just, everything was always, you never knew what would be next. So I guess I come from a little bit of that too, where I like the idea of not necessarily making the same album over again, and instead trying something different. And I think that's one of the things that's kind of created this vast sound, I guess I'm trying to create, but all using the same instrument. And that's the one thing I do stick with. Everything on every one of my records is purely the Warr Guitar. There is no added, unless there's, a guitarist and a drummer like in the band, but everything that it's all being created by me on that Warr Guitar.
Yeah.
So
I believe that Jonas now is playing with Steve Hackett in his band. Yeah, I interviewed Jonas. He's a very nice guy. I interviewed him, I don't know, like 4 months ago. And then I like Genesis, so I like Steve Hackett and Bias, I suppose. But good to be seeing him several times here, in a couple of months when he come back to the United States tour. And you're very prolific. Some people will say, man, I would be happy if I could do one record or one CD or whatever the output the media happens to be, but in your case, you have done over 10. So it's how you manage to make time, how you're able to work and sleep and play and record and tour and make a little bit of money on the side, playing gigs.
Some days it's easier than others. I'll admit that. Right now, I feel very inspired. I don't know what creating all this music. I mean, I've got three more things that might be coming out this year, and already next year I've got another two that I just started finishing up or in the process of finishing up. So I don't know. It's just what I'm doing is I'm riding this wave because I know that at some point it might dry up, and so I don't want to necessarily stop until that time comes. So right now it just seems like I'm just very motivated and creative, and the creation is just coming to me. So I might as well just stick with it. So
absolutely, yeah, absolutely. No, if that's your passion and that's what you like to do, who am I to criticize you? So go for it. And in March, a couple of months ago, you ended up releasing Subsequent Ruins with Barco on drums. It's a very good album. I listened to that last night, and as I was preparing questions for the interview, and I really like it. Very different from the other stuff you have done in the past. I haven't listened to everything you have done, but enough to give an idea of your music and that kind of stuff. It's a lot more, progressive, and it's very well done, put together. How long does it take for you to end to have an idea call Marco and start engaging and then put some track going back and forth. And eventually you guys are happy with the, whatever, 8 tracks, 10 tracks, and then, you hire a master, somebody to remaster that and then put it out there. How many months it does take?
It depends on the record. That one took a little longer just because
Yeah.
obviously it's including Marco, and then I had Andy Vendette master it, and so there's a little bit more pieces to the puzzle, so that one took a little longer. But one of the things that's really kind of opened up a lot of this creativity too, I should say, is that I recently moved. I say recently, it's now been a couple of years, but I moved to a different neighborhood in Chicago, and I was walking around this neighborhood and saw a building that to me looked like a recording studio. And so I thought, I think that's a recording studio in there. It is literally just like about a block and a half from my house. And I walked past it a bunch of times, and then I thought, I'm going to look that up because I think that's a recording studio. And if it's not, I'd be shocked if it wasn't, because it's very nondescript on the outside, and as most studios are, they don't advertise that they've got boatloads of gear inside there. But I did that. I looked it up and I thought, and found that it was a studio, reached out to the person. And since then I've befriended him, and I am in there now 2-3 times a week recording. So that flexibility and that real, it's just made it so easy. So if I have an idea that comes to me now, it's as easy as, well, obviously I got to work around his schedule, but the next time he can get me in, I could be in and recording that idea. So I think that's really opened up a lot of this. So when you say how long does it take, it depends, but I mean, a lot from inception to recording, in some cases, like too soon, because one of the things I'm doing right now is I'm going back and relearning all the things that I've recorded over the last year, because in a lot of cases, I've done exactly that. I wrote it, recorded it, and then proceeded to forget about it because it was now, I had the definitive version of it recorded. But the only problem with that is that it doesn't sit long enough under my fingers to like make it be my own and ingrained in my memory. So now I'm going back and relearning some of those things. But I think that's really changed how I'm able to record. So it's called Gravel Road Recording. It's right around the corner from me. And Amory and I get together, like I said, once, twice, 3 times a week now, and record whatever it is that I've got coming out of my mind. So it's a pretty fast process now, I would say, because in fact, I've always got multiple things going too. That's the other thing, because it's there and because it's so convenient. I've always have like 3 different things happening at the same time, and then just kind of when one finishes, then it's done. And then so that Marco album in particular, though, that was a little bit more of a time consuming process, just because I intentionally went in there. Let's record this album now. Let's push everything off to the side. Let's make this one happen. Marco sent his drums back incredibly quick, so we were able to roll right after I had sent the initial Warr Guitar track. So we kind of moved through it fast, but I would say it still took a long time just because of the depth of the recording itself. So,
but feel free to elaborate on the meaning of subsequent ruins. I think it's related to how now we are slave to phones and computers and Zooms, and kids anymore don't read books. They don't go to the library. They're sitting right next to each other and doing this, or I have a teenager, so I know how it's like.
I see it so much, and so I always knew I wanted to do something in that vein, but what really kind of changed and gave me the idea was I had read the story of the Pied Piper, and in reading that, I started really seeing a lot of correlations to what was happening in the story to what is happening with these tech companies, and they're basically like leading children away from their families and taking them down this different path. So it really, that was the starting point for it. So I had this idea. I kind of knew that's where I wanted to go with it, but didn't have, wanted to then flesh it out a little bit more. And that's when I started working with the artist that I've worked with in a few previous releases, Hajim Mueller, and he took the art and created an idea where we were telling the story through a child's mind, or through a child's perspective of how influenced they were by the technology. So if you look and that's one of the reasons too, because I really wanted to make the CD in a world of digital downloads. A lot of people don't actually buy the CDs anymore because they don't have to, but I wanted to create something that gave them something extra. So we worked on this elaborate, I don't know what I'm going to show you. I don't know what extent you'll see it in the thing, but there's the CD, you open it up,
Yeah.
and then inside of there is the booklet that is the cover book. And so this is the child's booklet. And if you look inside, show you just some ideas. It's the artwork of the child. So as you go through the artwork, you see it's kind of like think of it like almost like a diary of a young child. So it's like childlike drawings, but you start to see the influence of like Mr. Screen, and how Mr. Screen is becoming more important than mom and dad, and then how his friends get a phone, and how cool his friend becomes for having the phone, and you slowly see this transformation of the child's mind as it gets a little bit more absorbed into the technology and taken away by it. So it was this idea of the Pied Piper, and so that's modern retelling of it, with technology being the idea of the Pied Piper leading them away, but through the child's mind like that. And so then I created the music to kind of go along with that, and so like a soundtrack, which is what I typically do since I work in instrumental music. A lot of the stuff I do is always in my mind. It's a soundtrack to something. The listener might not always understand or get what I'm meaning, but it's how I write music. Is I kind of visualize what's happening, and then I write the music to accompany that visualization that I have. So I did the same thing with this. So this is telling that story. So that's how the writing process came to be. And then like I said, the whole process, why this one took longer, is because it was a lot more elaborate. We put a 12-page booklet together with all the artwork, and that took some time. And then so.
Yeah, and now we appreciate now we have AI on top of social media. So, it's changing time. And I don't know if, like anything else in life, right? It's pros and cons, right? Parents need to be on top of the stuff for kids to do homework and not, screen time before this is done, or they need to help at home. But with a phone, with a computer, nowadays we have the world with fingerprint, with the internet and so forth. So it's great because if you like music, the way I do, it's great to have access to discography, biography, listen, go to Spotify, Bandcamp, and so on. It's bad if you're many hours through the day, right? So it's whose fault is it? I think the parents. I suppose some kids are more vulnerable than others because sometimes the parents are not present, or broken family, or whatever. But the parent need to be on top, and the kids need to know when to stop. And it's not easy for me to say, but not a kid anymore. But right. So,
but yeah, and I think that like anything in moderation, and there's good to everything and there's bad to everything. I guess one of the things that I've often explored, and I do this a lot with Aziola Cry as well, is like I just don't find it very exciting to explore the good in things. I think it's more captivating for me to explore the evils or the downsides of things, because you could write an album about how happy technology is made easy. It's made some of our lives, but I don't know. To me, that just doesn't sound like much of a topic. It just sounds like, it works, but I always like exploring a little bit more of that darker side of things. And so that's where, like, to me, I see the negative as well. And I specifically chose, I want to take this negative side of technology and explore that idea.
Yeah, gotcha. You mentioned ego ID, so you must be familiar with the work of Sigmund Freud and psychology. And
Yeah, I love that kind of stuff. I do a lot of reading on that. I don't have a degree in psychology. I don't have any real connection to it, but I just later on in life have found a lot of interest in that. So I read a lot of books, and I read a book recently about how the mind is changing from technology and how the brain is actually adapting to technology, and things like that fascinate me. So that's what kind of ends up coming into these album ideas.
yeah, I like the stuff. Off topic. I'm going to Europe in a couple of days and to see some shows and talk to some musicians. I'm going to be visiting. I've been in the Sigmund Freud Museum in Vienna in Germany as well, but going to be visiting the house of Carl Gustav Jung. I don't know if you are familiar with the stuff in Zurich. So I'm looking forward to. I'm like you. I'm an engineer by trade, right? I'm a computer consultant, but I'm always reading stuff. Always reading. I'm always listening to music. I do a lot of stuff. So my brain works that way, I suppose. So
Yeah.
and but it's great to. I don't know, for my point of view, right? So for people complaining about Spotify, right? So if you're a musician, you don't make any money there. You need to have, I don't know, 1,000,000 hits to make, $20 or whatever it happens to be. For me, it's great because when I'm exploring music, I pay $10 a month. I'm always discovering. I'm always looking for new bands, for new. I put Jason Blake, and from Jason take me to this, to that, and I always create a playlist and listen to it. And but from a musician point of view, it's terrible because they don't make any money. But Bandcamp seems to be a lot. It's fair, right? They only take, I don't know, 10% of the 90% go to the artist. So it's not, the tool is not sophisticated as the Spotify of this world, but still is. It's fair for the musician, that right?
Yeah, especially like they have these Bandcamp Fridays, and that definitely even more goes to the artist. I had been reading about it for many years, and all I can say is that there's a lot of truth. Where I make most of my money is at shows, when I just sell, and people still will buy CDs at shows. I think that souvenir. I mean, I do the same thing. I go to shows and still will buy a CD just because there's more of a connection to the artist at that point. I like going up and speaking to them. Signing the CD or whatever. But I definitely think that's where, the merch and all that kind of thing, that's where the money can still be made. I think that, I'm the same boat as you. Like, as a listener, I love Spotify. I listen, I get turned on to all sorts of new things. As the artist, I don't know. I see both sides of it because, like, do I make a lot of money off of it? No, not, I'm sure the people selling, millions of records make decent amount of money, but I think everybody that's down a little further doesn't make much money. But on the other hand, it does, like you say, expose my music to a lot wider audience that it wouldn't.
That's right.
So I don't know. I'm okay with that, as long as, like I said, the shows, as long as people still buy the CDs, because that's where I do make more of the money. If that ever dries up, then I think that becomes, I got to figure out the next step or whatever, wherever it could be possibly earned.
Yeah, nowadays, many. I mean, in my case, I buy a lot of music. Right? I have a music collection, and I see where I live over 50 shows a year or so. So I spend a lot of time a lot of money in music. My wife says that I have an expensive taste because I go to expensive shows and stuff. But nowadays, cars, new cars don't come with CDs, so people, unfortunately, well, I don't know who am I to say, but unfortunately, from my point of view, people live in, very, they are going fast, right? They can download the stuff, play 10 seconds, I don't like it, play 10 seconds, I don't like it. Okay, this track, I don't like it. And then, okay, so, I have a big vinyl collection, so I sort of forced to listen to the whole album and, flip it upside down and listen to the other side and look at the picture. I found that it's appealing to me, as opposed to, listen to just MP3 in the car and so um,
Right.
yeah. But people nowadays still where I buy music and or Amazon or eBay or other places. Nowadays, people buy a lot of vinyl. Vinyls going up and up and up, and then CDs happen to be going down, down, down. Used to be the other way around. Now they flip, right.
Right. Well,
No.
and I think it depends too, generational. I'm sure the younger kids have no interest in this, but I still come from the generation where I actually like to grab the booklet, read inside of it, learn about the artist, know who recorded it, who mastered them. Like those are the things that I still get interested in. And the digital, Spotify doesn't give you that information. So
That's right. Yeah.
I still like to own the CD just simply for that, to kind of dig through it and learn more. So I'm hoping that people still do that.
Yeah. How many gigs you do like in a month? Let's say, now the summer is coming up and you have a lot of gigs. Yeah.
It depends. So I'm looking to book a lot this summer. I think that'll they're starting to come into I would say, I don't know, 1-2 a month in the Chicagoland area. And then starting to, at least with the solo stuff, branch out a little bit more closer to me. Like I've played some shows in Wisconsin, I've played some shows in Michigan. So kind of the Midwest is what I've been concentrating on right now with the solo stuff. See, there's the album you've heard, the Subsequent Ruins, that's a little heavier, and so that's the louder rock club venue. But I also just play solo Warr Guitar, where I have like an acoustic version of the Warr Guitar, and so that could even be coffee shop type volume. And so that I'm getting more gigs with, because I could play the same material, just like a toned down version of it. The minute that I add drums, it becomes a little bit more of a rock club thing. I just did a couple shows doing the rock club thing, and I have more booked for the end of the year. But in the summertime, I'm going to try to do a little bit more of these quieter things. It also corresponds to some new music that I have coming out in the summer that is a little bit more just acoustic, me on the Warr Guitar, no accompaniment.
Yeah.
So,
is your music your only source of income in general, or you
I'm a school teacher.
Another job somewhere? Huh?
I'm a school teacher. I teach 4th and 5th graders.
Yeah, that's great, man. It's difficult to make a living as a full-time musician, right? So, unless you are big name. Is I have interviewed several people during the pandemic that they didn't make it, and decided to, hey, no, can't. It's the COVID, I cannot go outside, cannot play. I better go to school. So they forgot the music and they left the music life behind, and they're doing other activities nowadays. So it's tough, I suppose, but that's the way it is sometimes. And what kind of music do you listen to now? Nothing to do with your music. What are your top 5 bands or artists that you listen to recently?
Recently, let me think. I like Animals as Leaders, progressive instrumental. I like that. I've always liked Tool, so I always kind of come back to listening to Tool.
Yeah.
And like I said, I mentioned Jonas Hallberg. I'm always listening to Jonas Hallberg stuff. Let me think. I'm big into soundtracks, so whatever soundtrack is currently piquing my interest, I'll listen to that. Sometimes it's by composer, or sometimes it's just like I see a movie that I like the music to and I listen to that. And then ambient music, I'm always so a lot of times too, I'm listening to the other things on the label that I'm on. So I'm listening to some of the other artists on that. But yeah, I would say that's the bulk of what I've been listening to lately, at least.
Yeah. For in terms of soundtracks, that piqued my interest because I have a big soundtrack collection. So it's kind of electronic music, the Hans Zimmer, the John Williams type of the world, or the more scary movies or horror movies. That what kind of stuff you? If you don't mind.
It really depends, but I don't, not necessarily horror movie soundtracks. Not to say that they're not great, because I mean, John Carpenter, I love some of the stuff that
John Carpenter
stuff is great. But I would say, let me think. I don't know. It's a lot of the times it's just based on particular movies.
Okay, but yeah. You go
But
to see a movie, you listen to the music in the
yeah,
background, and you
yeah,
say,
and
"Who is
then
this guy?" And you look it up and got it.
right, look them up, and a lot of times it's not even somebody I've heard of, so it's not.
Yeah,
I really like that guy's now pretty famous, but I like the music from Game of Thrones. That's a more recent thing that I went back through and listened to every season of the music, because I really like what that stuff sounded like. I mean, there's the famous guys that do it too, that I like that stuff as well.
the Hans Zimmer type of the
Hans
world.
Zimmer, yeah, the Hans Zimmers, and yeah. In
Yeah.
fact, I just this last week listened to a live concert. It was a Hans Zimmer in concert, and I believe I remember reading something about how Guthrie Govan was plays guitar with him in his live thing, and he's with the Aristocrats. Plays with Marco and with the Aristocrats, and I went listening to that to hear if that was in fact him on that. So yeah, I love that stuff as well too.
That's great. I recently discovered the 7D media.
Yeah, that's
You know,
Trey Guns.
yeah, I need to check it out because I when I was putting question for this interview, I came across that, and this I need to listen to people that on that particular record label of family musician, if you will, and because there's a lot of very good stuff there. Right? I just saw the name and say, oh, I know the guy, and so I need to put more time, and then
there's some really cool things on his label. Yeah, I would definitely check it out. Go to the 7D. Well, you can go to the 7D website, but then the Bandcamp page has a nice listing of all the artists on there, and you can then listen to stuff from there.
Absolutely,
got some really cool stuff in there.
Yeah. So what is coming up for you? You say you are going to be touring in Chicago area and then other places, and then a new album's coming up for you?
Yes. So I have an album just basically waiting to go. That's a little more of a quiet album. Just me on the acoustic Warr, and so I'm going to put that on the summer, and then I've been booking shows to do that, and then come back in the fall with a little bit more of the heavy stuff again, because I really want to just see what I can do with this acoustic thing over the summer. So I've got I think already 4 of them booked, and continue to do a little bit more of that. And then, like I said, I incorporate some of the Subsequent Ruins material even into the more acoustic sets. But then I've been practicing with a drummer so that we can actually play the Subsequent Ruins stuff because I've been doing a lot of it solo. And so I want to actually play it as it is on the album with the drummer. And so we've been practicing, and we have some shows starting to come in fall. I know the first one's in September or something like that.
Good for you, man. Feel free to mention your website, your Bandcamp, where people can buy your music and so forth. So,
all right. So website is jasonblakemusic.com.
Yeah.
That's a good place to go to then have everything kind of links off of that. Bandcamp is jasonblake.bandcamp.com.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think if you go to my website at Jason Blake Music, you can, all the links are right there in the top to get to everything else.
Yeah.
Plus, I actually still like updating my website and making my website really more of my ultimate hub. And then sure, I know a lot of people just check out what people do on social media, and that's how their source of, but I still like my website. I still like doing things to it and updating it and whatever. So kind of hope people go there first, and then sure, you can always go off to all the other stuff. But I
Yep.
to update that first, and then the other things second.
Absolutely. And okay, Jason, it was very nice talking to you. Good luck to you. Hopefully we'll see one day in Chicago. We'll have to listen to your music, and we can maybe grab a beer or a pizza or something. Right.
That sounds great. Thank you so
All right.
much.
Thank you. Take it easy. Have a great evening. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
All right. Bye-bye.